We need a new system. We need a new society. We need to demand that which may have sounded impossible even a few weeks ago, but is not only realizable, but an imperative necessity. Israel's genocidal war against the people of Gaza has entered its 166th day. A new massacre at Al-Shifa Hospital. And Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law and former senior advisor, has looked at Gaza as a valuable piece of real estate. Welcome to the Socialist Program. I'm your host, Brian Becker. Today we're talking with Miko Peled. Miko is a human rights activist. He's the host of the Miko Peled Podcast. He's the author of The General's Son, A Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, and Injustice, The Story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. You can find his podcast, books, and much more at MikoPeled.com. Miko, welcome back.
Good to be with you. Thank you, Brian.
It's hard to kind of capture the moment in a way, Miko. You've been very active, not just since October 7th, but for many, many years in support of the Palestinian people. Your books have made a huge impression on audiences in the United States and around the world. You've been paying careful attention, to put it mildly. We have new developments, and a lot of the same. The new developments are that Chuck Schumer, the leading Democrat in the U.S. Senate and a leading supporter of Israel, has said that Netanyahu has lost his way, meaning a sort of kind of criticism of Netanyahu that the U.S. media made a lot out of. At the same time, Netanyahu said, buzz off, we're not a banana republic, we're going to keep doing what we are doing, meaning preparing for the invasion of Rafah. And then you have Jared Kushner, which I'm going to play a clip in a couple minutes of Kushner with Ivanka visiting Israel, talking about Gaza, just a really good investment opportunity. Anyway, let's start with Schumer. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, it's good that he woke up one day and discovered that there was a Palestine, that there was a problem. But I don't think Netanyahu lost his way. I think Netanyahu found his way. Netanyahu is doing exactly what he always believed needed to be done. He has broad support on the issue of what is happening. If there's any criticism, it's against the military that they're not doing enough. He is, I think Netanyahu, I think he's got it all wrong. And of course, the problem has never been Netanyahu. The problem has been the existence of this settler colonial, racist, genocidal regime that has taken over Palestine. So it's good that he noticed. It's good that he's come out. But I think he's the one that's got it wrong completely. And if there's a way of saying something without saying it, this is what it is. I mean, he's trying to somehow, I suppose, appease all the voices in the Democratic Party that are out there saying, we got to do something. And so he did this. But again, I don't think he believes that Netanyahu lost his way. I think the support for Netanyahu is precisely because he's doing precisely what he always said he was going to do. And he is following his ideology, he's following his belief all the way through to the end. What we're seeing here is not some kind of mistake. It's not a fluke. What we're seeing in Gaza is the execution of the Zionist ideology, pure and simple. And granted, Netanyahu has been a little bit more honest than maybe some other leaders within the state of Israel, within the Zionist movement. But he certainly hasn't lost his way at all. I think the opposite is true.
What about Biden? You look at the U.S. media, Miko, and the pro-Biden media, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, they are engaged in this kind of weird hand-wringing, like Biden is stuck. Poor Biden. He's too close to Netanyahu. He's overcommitted, but he can't stop. Like he's stuck, as if the United States is this helpless giant, as if the Biden administration doesn't have actual options if it actually wanted to stop the war. I was speaking last week with Mohammed Nabulsi from the Palestinian Youth Movement, and he made the argument this is the U.S. war, that Netanyahu, while he's got his own interest, he's pursuing his own aims, that in all ways, this is a U.S. war against the people of Palestine.
Well, I don't know that I don't know that I would quite say it that way. I think Biden is, well, I don't know if it's Biden himself, but the people around Biden, the people who are within the administration, again, they're stuck. They, on the one side, on the one hand, I don't think they're seeing anything wrong with what Israel is doing. And again, it's not Netanyahu. It would have been somebody else if Netanyahu wasn't there. But on the one hand, I don't think they see anything wrong with what they're doing. I mean, the administration after administration have supported the Zionists' campaign against Palestinians. They supported the genocide that's been going on, as you and I and many others know, for over 75 years. They've supported the apartheid state. They've supported the ethnic cleansing. They never said anything. So now it's a little embarrassing because the number of civilians is a little bit higher than they're willing to stomach, and there are all these voices again within the Democratic Party that are, expecting their leaders to say something. But I think the commitment to Israel is not necessarily because it's an American war. It's for all these other reasons that Americans have always supported and continue to support Israel no matter what. But again, I think that this image that somehow America is unable to act. They could stop it now. They could have stopped it yesterday. They could have stopped it years ago. I mean, it's not just the aid; it's the diplomatic cover. The Sixth Fleet is in the Mediterranean. They can place a naval blockade against Israel. They can impose an embargo on arms sales and a no-fly zone over Gaza right now. He's the commander in chief. He can do that right now if he wanted to end it. Instead of that, he's talking about building a pier to provide aid and all this kind of nonsense. We know the pier's got nothing to do with aid, but that's another issue. They're airdropping food and all that kind of nonsense. Where pick any place in the Gaza Strip, and within a 5-minute drive, you have all the food and medicine and the needs that the Palestinian people need. It's just that Israel doesn't want them to have the access. So, it's very convenient for the Democrats to paint themselves as somehow incapable of doing anything. They could stop it. They could have stopped it. In fact, they could have prevented this horror that we've been seeing in Gaza could have been prevented.
All right. Well, let me just ask you a quick follow-up question, and then we're going to go to Jared Kushner. From your point of view, why is the United States 100% committed to Israel at the moment when Israel has obviously become a pariah in the around the world? Let's not use, weak phrases like the international community. People around the world right now are disgusted with Israel. Governments want to distance themselves from Israel, regionally and internationally. The Biden administration may lose re-election, at least partly, because of his commitment to Israel at the moment that this genocide is being witnessed in real time. It's like we can watch a genocide in real time. If it doesn't come across in the corporate-owned media, people watch it on social media. From your point of view, and you've written about this, you've explained it, why is the United States, this great empire, joined at the hip with Israel and with whoever the Israeli leader is as they commit this genocide?
Because for over 100 years, the Zionist movement has been investing heavily in influencing and creating strong bonds in American society. It's not just lobbyists in Washington, D.C. It's connections to the press. It's connections to philanthropy. It's connections to culture. It's connections to education. They've done a tremendous job presenting a very compelling case. So when any American knows that they support Israel because that's what they've seen, that's what they've learned, that's what they've watched, that's what they've heard at church or synagogue, this is part of American culture. The Zionists have invested and continue to invest in enormously, and they've done this again for over 100 years. In this in making sure that this compelling story is deeply, deeply rooted in America. So it's not just up to a particular politician or, to change a policy, because it's so deep rooted. philanthropy, all these wonderful, Jewish millionaires that build libraries and do all these wonderful things, and they are heavily, heavily connected to Zionism and so on. So that is now. There's never been a compelling story. There's never been an expression of the Palestinian story, not even remotely similar to what we're seeing on the Zionist side. There is no story. Most people confuse Palestine with Pakistan. And if they know that there's a Palestine, all they know is that there's some terrorism, that there's this thing, war with the Jews, that they want to kill Israelis, that maybe they want to boycott Israel, so they're anti-Semitic. There's no context. And so why would anybody not support Israel? Why would anybody support the Palestinian cause, since it doesn't exist? It's not in the education system. It's very little, very, very little shows up in the press. It's not part of the culture. It doesn't exist in American life. So this is the reason. I mean, this is really, I think, the reason why there's such support. Plus, they are in Washington, D.C. I mean, you know very well, when you walk into congressional offices, you see the furniture and you see there's some group, some Zionist group in the offices, in the cafeteria. They're sending thousands of emails every day. They are on it all the time. And there's no equivalent. There's nothing even remotely similar on the Palestinian side.
What has changed, Miko, and you know this very well because of your own activism and intervention in the last months, is that the support for the Palestinian people has sort of exploded in a grassroots movement. It's not the majority of the country, certainly, and it's not really at all reflected in Congress or in the boardrooms of corporations, the media, etc. Although there are now rebellions going on, mini rebellions, at least in some news organizations, by staff who are outraged by the pro-Israeli coverage of this genocide. But millions of people, I'm talking literally millions of people, have been in the streets since October 7th. Here in New York City, where I am, I'm with the Answer Coalition. We worked with the Palestinian Youth Movement and other Arab, Muslim, Palestinian partners. On the next day, on October 8th, we had a big demonstration in Times Square. But what's exploded is activism everywhere. Joe Biden can't go anywhere. Anthony Blinken, he can't go anywhere. He can't even go home. Same with Lloyd Austin. Same with Jake. I mean, there is a profound sea change. And of course, as we know, in a society where the U.S. touts itself as a great democracy, but this kind of grassroots sentiment doesn't really find an easy way into the electoral system. The mainstream media is like an echo chamber for Israel and an echo chamber for the military-industrial complex. But I feel this is going to make a huge difference over time. And it's not just in the United States, it's globally, but the change in the United States is very profound. You were born in Israel. You were originally from an important Zionist family. Not originally, you were. And you turned against Zionism. You've been trying to talk about Zionism as an inherently racist apartheid ideology. Obviously, you can tell based on the response, this is something quite different.
It is different. I agree with you 100%. I think that still there are two issues here. One is that the support, the grassroots, the popular support for Palestine and for the cause of justice in Palestine has always been there. It's been there everywhere, and of course now it's been amplified without question to new levels. But like you say correctly, it has not reached the corporate boardrooms. It has not reached the halls of power where decisions are being made. And I think that as people who support the cause and fight for the cause of justice in Palestine, that's an important piece that we're still missing, that we haven't been able to affect it. And this is true everywhere. Every country I go to, I hear the exact same things. Popular support, and you see it. You see the people in the streets. You see what's happening, even before October 7th, for years. And yet the governments and the media and the corporations, it hasn't affected them. So true, now, Biden can't go anywhere. Hardly anybody can go anywhere without being disrupted. I've been to the Israeli embassy several times, and it's amazing to see the siege that was placed. There's an actual siege there. There's more Palestinians. You can barely see an Israeli flag, because the Palestinian flags have completely enveloped the entire building, and there's a very strong pro-Palestinian presence there, which is wonderful to see. But once again, at the same time, we haven't seen that gap between the popular support and the grassroots work, and the decision makers. That's something we have not yet been able to accomplish. So that's exactly the problem. That's where I'm seeing, there's a big gap there that I think we need to sit down and figure out, how do we close that gap, and what it is that needs to be done in order to do that effectively and as quickly as possible.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I believe, as somebody who's been also active for a long time in support of the Palestinian people, going back to the 1970s and 1980s, actually, where it was very hard even to get left-wing progressive forces who were anti-war, anti-racist to speak out for Palestine. Palestine was a unique taboo even for huge parts of the left. And, this is now shifted. I think this will never go back to the way it was. I think Israel will have pariah status with the grassroots. The left is now, all sorts of sections of the left are now organizing in one level or another. Many libertarians and Republicans have turned against Israel. I mean, it's kind of a broad development. In the Vietnam War, the anti-war demonstrations didn't seem to have any palpable impact for a long time. In 1965, 66, 67, only in 1968, when it was clear that the U.S. was going to lose the war in Vietnam, and also where anti-war agitation started to impact U.S. military, such that the military started to go into rebellion. I'm talking about the rank-and-file soldiers went into rebellion against the Vietnam War. Then that movement acted as a restraint on what the U.S. could do. The anti-war movement at home couldn't defeat the U.S. on the battlefield. That was the Vietnamese who did that, and they had their own allies in the USSR and China. But the global anti-war movement, especially the one in the United States, was a restraint on what the U.S. could do. They could not escalate. They could not use nuclear weapons, for instance, against the people of Vietnam, because there would have been a revolution inside the United States at that point, by 1969, 1970, when Nixon came in. So I see this as a long-term process. I see that the identification of Israel now globally as a genocidal state, that the U.S. is tied to it, will have the impact of breaking more and more sections of the population away from the old narrative, the dominant narrative, the Israeli Zionist narrative. And I think this will be ultimately one of the key component elements for real change. But we have a situation where people's options are quite limited. So right now, people are organizing uncommitted votes in the Democratic primaries, and some of them have been very large. In Michigan, where Biden beat Trump by 150,000 votes in 2020, 100,000 people voted not committed. In Minnesota, that was 13%. In Minnesota, it was almost 20%. In some of the swing states, this disaffection from Democratic voters will actually be very impactful on whether Biden can win. One of the things that I'm always telling people when I'm talking to them is abandoning Biden is good, but embracing the Republican is not good, because the Republicans and the Democrats are essentially the same. There's just a matter of degree and emphasis. I want to play this video clip. It's short. It's very short. It's Jared Kushner. He and Ivanka Trump went to Israel in December. Jared Kushner was the senior advisor to Donald Trump. If Trump is reelected, they're going to be back in place. Here's what Jared Kushner said about the genocide in Gaza.
The thing that I would try to do if I was Israel right now is I would just bulldoze something in the Negev. I would try to move people in there. I know that won't be the popular thing to do, but I think that that's a better option to do, so you can go in and finish the job. In Gaza's waterfront property, it could be very valuable to, if people would focus on kind of building up.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get more contemptible and more open and more honest from Jared Kushner. Anyway, your thoughts, Miko?
Well, you know, it's interesting that he realizes this because the Palestinians have been living in Gaza and enjoying this waterfront property for millennia. I mean, Gaza has always been a center of wealth, a center of culture, a center of learning, a center of commerce. Wealthy Palestinians have had homes there. You know, Gaza is well known for the beautiful dunes, for the fragrance of the citrus trees that grow there. Of course, the Palestinians have always enjoyed this. But what he's talking about is bulldozing, getting them out, putting them somewhere in the desert, so that Jews and white people can enjoy the waterfront property. That's what he's talking about. I can't imagine. I can't imagine a more racist, horrifying thing to say. You know, Palestinians have been enjoying this waterfront property until Israel came and destroyed it. You know, even during the years of the siege, still, I mean, the Palestinians have been enjoying this waterfront property. There are homes there. People go to the beach there. You know, people enjoy it. He wants different people to enjoy it, as though he's just realized, as though Palestinians don't know how to appreciate the fact that this is, you know, this is great. It was also well known for seafood. I mean, of course, it's choice property, it's waterfront property. He just doesn't want the Palestinians to enjoy it. He wants Israel to finish the job, and it's horrifying to hear Jewish people talk about finishing the job or solving the problem, because you can't but equate that to the Nazis, to the final solution. You know, that's what he's hinting at. That's what he's hinting at. And, you know, I refrain from comparisons with the Holocaust and the Nazis, and I don't say this, but at this particular time, I think the similarities are striking. And I have to say, the response of people who do care and people who are trying to stop it still is, you know, can you imagine waiting and negotiating and waiting for Hitler to agree to a ceasefire while the Holocaust and the genocide is going on? I mean, this is unbelievable. And he's speaking just like, he's speaking just like a Nazi would about Jews. Clear it up, finish the job, and allow other people, you know, people who are more worthy to enjoy this waterfront property. It's absolutely outrageous that he is not being challenged on this. And again, as a Jewish person, using this terminology is I mean, it's horrible for anybody, but, you know, you'd expect somebody who's Jewish to at least understand why you shouldn't use this kind of terminology.
And again, it's, you know, Kushner's with the Republicans, he's with Trump. The Democrats say, well, if Trump comes in, it's going to be the end of our democracy, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to pursue essentially the same policy towards Gaza, towards the Palestinians, towards Israel. And then the mainstream corporate-owned, capitalist-owned media, the way they talk about Kushner is so passive. Like, this is an obviously fascistic, outrageous, Nazi-like statement. But there are so many other things you could work with in terms of exposing Jared Kushner, for instance. I mean, Donald Trump's first visit anywhere when he became president in 2017 was to Saudi Arabia. And then the Saudi investment fund with Mohammed bin Salman, basically the acting head of state, on it, they gave Kushner and the Kushner family multiple loans, including a $2 billion loan, even though he's the senior advisor to the White House. So obviously the corruption is so obvious. So you have racism, pro-fascist, genocidal comments, corruption. Here's what the New York Times, which is so against Donald Trump, this is how they wrote about Kushner when he got the $2 billion loan from the Saudis. Ethics experts say that such a deal creates the appearance of potential payback for Mr. Kushner's activities in the White House. Experts, Miko, experts, you know, they must have gone to like some expert school so that they can say this creates the appearance of an ethical problem from a White House official. Anyway, the whole thing is so morbid, but also so normalized. That's the whole thing here. Everything about the establishment, including the so-called anti-Trump establishment within the the corporate establishment, the capitalist establishment, however one might want to call it, they're essentially the same people. They have a beef with each other on some things, but when it comes to the really important stuff, they're the same people.
Look, I think if the Democrats wanted to win this election, they would replace Biden. I mean, anybody's better than Biden. And the non-committed votes. I mean, if even before that, it was obvious that he's a bad. He shouldn't be running. He shouldn't be the guy. The likelihood of him losing is extremely high. And I think also that I agree with you. Just because someone's not voting for the Democrats or Biden doesn't mean they should vote for Trump. There are other options. There are There are several good third party options. So I strongly hope that people will look at those as options. But Trump's corruption. I mean, he was president for 4 years. He didn't let up. I mean, the corruption was so blatant. And the fact that it hasn't impeded his ability to run again and have a good chance at winning is just beyond belief. I mean, it's absolutely beyond belief. The how people don't care. People don't care that he's corrupt. People, never mind all of his other all the other baggage that he brings, but the sheer corruption of him and Kushner and the others doesn't seem to bother anybody. He's still electable. And again, juxtapose that with America's claim of being this great democracy and having the rule of law and how the law applies to everyone. It's such a joke. It's such complete nonsense. And again, if the Democrats were serious about winning this election, they could have replaced, and they still can, I suppose, replace Biden with somebody who can do something, somebody who's a real opposition, somebody who can provide some kind of a second option to this.
Miko, I want to talk now as we move forward about how you went through your own transformation. I think it's very important for people to hear it. I've talked to you about it before, but many people might be tuning in for the first time. I mean, many, many people are now looking for alternative media. And I'm also talking about Jewish Americans and young Jewish Americans who have been out in the streets. They have organizations. They've been protesting against the Democratic Party support for the genocide. And how has it shifted the opinion within the Jewish American community? And also I want to talk about what's it like within the Israeli community, Israeli population, meaning the people in Israel, the Jewish population in Israel. First, let's start with a video clip. We've used it before, but I want to use it. It's Truman, who was president in 1948 during the Nakba, during the catastrophe, the expulsion, the ethnic cleansing, and murder of Palestinians. He does this a little bit later for the Truman Library, but he's reflecting on what the decision was. And then I want to get your opinion, your take on that, some of that history, and also then talk about your own transformation. Anyway, this is Harry Truman, President of the United States, 1948.
We had several other people in the country, even among the Jews, the Zionists particularly, who were against anything that was to be done if they couldn't have the whole of Palestine and everything handed to them on a silver plate so they wouldn't have to do anything. It couldn't be done. We had to take it in small doses. You can't move 5 or 6 million people out of a country and fill it up with 5 or 6 million more and expect both sets of them to be pleased.
You have to do it in small pieces. Anyway, I don't think Harry Truman thought of himself as a visionary or prophetic, but he wasn't wrong in terms of what actually happened.
Yeah, well, actually, he's wrong in that he said that you can't take millions of people out, bring millions of people in, and expect that they'll all be happy. I think the people that were brought in are quite happy. Although there's this very strange phenomenon among Israelis who are always looking for a way to get a second passport so they can leave. If they, so they have the option to go elsewhere. There's like millions of Israelis that are applying for European passports because so many European countries, if you can prove that you are, if you're from Spain or from Portugal, or now if you're from Ukraine, then you can apply and get a passport, which means you have a European passport. You'd be amazed at how many Israelis are doing this right now. As Palestinians, can't wait to go back. The Israelis are the Zionists are perfectly happy, and the Zionists, they embarked on this. They established an apartheid state. They embarked on a campaign of genocide and ethnic cleansing all at the same time. And again, keeping in mind that this is just 3 short years after the end of the genocide of the Jews in Europe, the end of the Holocaust, the world allowed a second genocide to commence in Palestine by people who claim that they represent Jews, which of course is horrifying to think. And this is what we have today. We just have this ongoing catastrophe going on and on and on. And I don't know exactly what the point was that Truman is trying to make, standing in front of that map. But the one interesting thing is that Palestine is written as Palestine. So anybody that wants to claim there was no Palestine in that map, there is no Israel. And that's true for all maps pretty much of the region up to May 15, 1948, where the world forgot it was Palestine and starting using the name Israel. So to me, that's really, really telling that he's standing there and the map says Palestine and there's not a single mention of an Israel. And of course, those of us that are standing up for justice in Palestine, we want to revert back to that map and bring it back to a free and democratic Palestine, granted with equal rights for everybody who lives there at the moment.
Yeah. So, Miko, let's just talk about Israeli public opinion. When you said everybody supports Netanyahu, obviously you're talking about members of the U.S. Congress, but you're talking about inside of Israel. I mean, there were massive protests against Netanyahu right up until October 7th. And so obviously a big part of the population in Israel hates Netanyahu or wants to get rid of Netanyahu or wants Netanyahu to stand trial for corruption. But what's the position of those same Israelis regarding the war against the people in Palestine?
Well, I'll say 2 things. I've said this before, and I don't think anybody likes Netanyahu. I don't think his mother likes him. But the Israelis understand very well, I think, that he cannot be replaced. And all the protests that went on, so that's one thing. The other side is to demonstrate where Israelis stand during these massive anti-Netanyahu protests, which, by the way, were protests by the privileged of the privileged, which is why they got so much attention. When other segments of Israeli population protested with people whose skin color was darker, nobody took any interest. Suddenly, when these are the cream of the most privileged are protesting, the president of the United States suddenly takes interest. But they represent the 40-45%, so they didn't stand a chance. Now, one thing that is really telling, okay, among the privileged of the privileged in Israeli society are the Israeli Air Force pilots, the reservists, and they have to go. They have to maintain their training, a weekly training. During the protests, there was a whole group of them that did not go to training because they said fighting for a democracy is more important. So they went to the protests and did not go, and that is unbelievable. That is unheard of. That these people are considered the gods of the Olympus. The Air Force pilots wouldn't go, would forgo the training. Now, as soon as Israel began bombing and murdering tens of thousands of civilians, where are these conscientious pilots? They're all in line to bomb. They're all standing in line. These are the liberals. These are the privileged white liberals, if you will, within Israeli society, within the framework of Israeli society. Okay, within that framework, and they can't wait. Reservists and not only pilots but others, they can't wait to pull up. Even people that were not called. They found a uniform somewhere in the closet, found a gun, and ran to kill. So Israeli society is 100% behind the genocide, and they've always been 100% behind the genocide of Palestinians, always, from the very beginning, from 1947. This hasn't changed. They didn't like Netanyahu for a period of time because Netanyahu made allies with people that they didn't like. He had alliances with settlers, the West Bank settlers, which the more privileged Israelis don't like. So that's what that was about. But in terms of the genocide, in terms of the oppression, in terms of maintaining the apartheid regime, everybody's 100% behind it. I mean, look at it. With a few exceptions, of course, a few individuals here and there, small groups that are, that oppose this genocide. But Israeli society is behind this. Israeli politicians are all, they're eating each other's young. They're fighting for the seat. Everybody wants the chair. But Netanyahu has created a situation, he's a brilliant politician, and he created a reality where there really is no opposition. So let's say Israel went to the polls tomorrow. Who are they going to vote for? Everybody that's a possibility that represents some kind of another possibility is in bed with Netanyahu anyway. He's either sitting with him in the government right now or sat with him in the government a few years ago. It's a game of musical chairs, and everybody knows that only Netanyahu is capable of creating and maintaining a solid coalition, as he's proved to do, as he's proven many times, that can, as they quote unquote lead Israel through these difficult times. So that's the reality in Israel. So, again, going back to Chuck Schumer saying, Israelis need to go to the polls. Who are they going to vote for? There is no opposition.
Let's talk about Rafah. A huge part of the people in Gaza are huddled in Rafah. There was another massacre. I looked at Haaretz, which is considered a liberal newspaper in Israel today. They were like 80 terrorists killed at Al-Shifa Hospital. Like, the Israelis are carrying out obvious war crimes by attacking people in hospitals and killing large numbers of them. The Netanyahu government had said that they would invade Rafah by March 10th, which was the beginning of Ramadan. We're about halfway through Ramadan now, or maybe not quite half. There hasn't been an invasion. Do you expect that the Israelis are going to invade Rafah? And what's been the hesitation so far?
Well, who knows? I mean, there might be some negotiating going in, some backroom negotiations going on with the Americans and others about whether or not and when precisely to attack. I think it's a tactical decision. I think strategically, as long as Israel is permitted to continue with the massacre of Palestinians, they'll continue. The situation is so severe right now anyway that, why would they stop? Unless there's somebody holding some kind of a carrot and saying, well, if you promise to wait with this, then maybe you can get that. But again, the biggest problem that I see is that Israel is seen as a legitimate partner in the conversations about what is happening in Gaza. That Israel gets a seat at the table instead of, like I said earlier, sanctions and embargo, boycotts and so on imposed on Israel so that the killing will stop. The conversations that take place take Israel into account, and Israel has to agree to the terms of what may or may not be some kind of a ceasefire, and that to me is the most grotesque aspect of this all of this. That the perpetrator of a genocide, like you said earlier, in broad daylight, they're not even hiding the fact that this is a genocide. Their discourse supports it, their actions support it. And yet they're invited to consider the terms of what they, of a possible ceasefire, as opposed to being completely forced to end forever this horror. And that, I think, is really the biggest problem of them all. Whether or not they're going to continue, massacring people in a particular part of the Gaza Strip or not, I think these are tactical issues. I think that strategically Israel has decided a long time ago that genocide is a strategic objective. The genocide of the Palestinian people, the destruction of their land, the destruction of the erasure of their history, and whatever memories people have of a Palestine, and that's where they're going with this. Nobody's ever tried to stop them. So why would they stop, and why would they not continue? Why would they not bomb people in Rafah?
The Palestinian resistance, the Palestinian steadfastness is so obvious, so observable. When people have been victimized by genocide, not just now, but earlier, ethnically cleansed, driven from the land, hounded, harassed, driven into refugee camps, you would think, okay, at a certain point, that struggle would just be erased, but it's not erased. The Palestinian struggle is not going away. The Palestinian people are fighting all over the place, mobilizing, educating people. And I know, Miko, that in the United States, this mass movement of against the Israeli genocide is in large measure led by young Palestinians. And they have a great clarity. They have a great political understanding and a great connection. Here we are 75 plus years after Nakba. So ultimately, if the Palestinian people won't stop fighting, no matter how heavy the casualties are, eventually this struggle will gain and is gaining more and more popular support, as you mentioned earlier. The Israeli population is getting a second passport. They want to get a passport for Europe. I've talked to Jewish American friends who have family in Israel. They're telling me the same thing, that what you talked about, people getting passports, having contingency plans. I mean, when I asked you the last time you were on the show, what's the future hold for the Zionist project, you were predicting that somewhere down this road, Zionism would be ended, that it wasn't a durable project for all of the reasons that we've been talking about. The Israeli population can leave, actually, but just your estimate of it. I mean, you've been doing this for so long. It feels to me like we've entered a new era. And some of the Palestinians are calling it the era of national liberation, that in spite of all of the mass murder, the brutality, the awfulness of what's going on, the fact that the Palestinians can't be erased means that ultimately the Palestinians will win. Palestine will be free. Do you still feel the same way?
You know, it's a good question, and I don't think that there's a clear answer here, and I'll tell you why. Ilan Pappé recently spoke, and there's a clip of him saying that honest historians in the future are going to teach about this particular period as the beginning of the end of the Zionist project, because when projects like Zionism, like the State of Israel, when they're about to collapse, empires and so on, that is when they become the most violent. That's when they become the most, scary. That's when, the other suffers the most. And so he very calmly, very confidently, as a historian, says this is the sign, and he said historians will teach it that way to their students. At the same time, I don't think it's going to be a miracle. It's not going to be an act of God. It's not written anywhere that this is how it's going to be, unless we make a very concerted effort. And that's the initiative I was telling you about before we started the show earlier today. Unless we make an absolute concerted effort to close the gap between what we're seeing in the streets, the popular support, not only in this country, but around the world, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in other countries that you wouldn't expect, that you'd expect, governments would already support the Palestinians, and they're not, in Africa and so on. Unless we make an absolute concerted effort to close that gap, nothing is going to change. Now, we're seeing what is happening in Gaza right now. I mean, it's an absolute genocide. There's no other way to describe it, but it's not the beginning or the end of a genocide. It's a part of a genocide that's been going on for a very long time. Granted, it's on steroids at this particular point. Palestinians, a friend of mine just came out after 3 months, an activist, Mundar Amira from the Aida camp near Bethlehem. He said, in Gaza, they die and that's over. He said, in the prisons, we die over and over and over again every single day. The prisons have become cemeteries of the living. The torture, the abuse of the prisoners, and there are over 10,000 prisoners right now in Israeli jails, is so horrifying that it's unprecedented. This guy, for the last 40 years, has been in and out of prison many, many times as an activist. It's unbelievable. The reality for Palestinians throughout all of Palestine, the horrors are unprecedented. And there's no end in sight, and I believe there will not be an end in sight unless we close that gap, unless we make people realize it's not just Gaza, it's not the West Bank, it's about this entity that has to be dismantled, which is the State of Israel. And to make it very, very clear to people that there is a path and I'm going to say a word that people are going to, not even mention anymore, which is peace. There is a path to peace so that people in Palestine, Palestinian people, can live in peace. The lives and the security and the safety of Palestinians can be guaranteed. But it has to be through a political solution at the end of which there is no state of Israel, but a free democratic Palestine from the river to the sea with equal rights. Unless we get that firmly planted in the halls of power, in the boardrooms, like you mentioned earlier, in the press, in people's minds, then it's not going to end. This is not going to end. You know as well as I do, Amnesty came out with an apartheid report over 2 years ago. Nobody even mentions it. It's not even mentioned. It's hardly mentioned anywhere. This is a gift that we were given by Amnesty to demonstrate clearly why sanctions, why boycotts are absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary. So that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect of it is the understanding that a single democracy with equal rights and the push for that, and these two things in unison, are the only way to end the suffering of Palestinians. Otherwise, there's no reason for Israel to stop. So the halls of power, I think, are the key. And closing this gap has to be, I think, the single most important focus for us right now.
Well, let's talk about the initiative. You're in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. You have 535 members of Congress. You have every domestic and international media outlet there. As I said, there are massive protests in Washington. There have been. On November 4th, we had hundreds of thousands. January 13th, hundreds of thousands. But even in between, almost every day, something is going on. So let's talk about what the next step is for you and the people you're working with there in Washington, D.C.
Well, we came up with an initiative that we're calling in Arabic, we're calling it Dar al-Hurriya. In English, it's the Palestine House of Freedom. And we actually have just got a wonderful location on Pennsylvania Avenue, not far from the Capitol. And, as you said, Washington has got all these elements that you just described, and there's not a single Palestinian flag anywhere. And that's a serious problem. I think in the absence of a physical location that has a flag, but not just a shell, a location in which work is being done, we're never going to win. We don't stand a chance against what the other side is doing. So to have a place with a flag where we can work together, where we can focus on advocacy that is absolutely required, but as strategic advocacy, working together, educating the public, educating the people who work at the Capitol, because today, even if you do talk to somebody like Jamal Bauman or some of these other more progressive politicians, they get that, two-state solution is nonsense. They get that there needs to be something stronger, but they're never going to say it. And many of them don't even have the context to understand why, if we want to see an end to the suffering of Palestinians, we have to talk about a single democracy with equal rights, a free Palestine from the river to the sea. To them, it's still a scary thought. We need to educate people and lead them to the place where that is the conversation in Washington, D.C. Because right now, people always fall back on this nonsense two-state solution, lie, which is really just always been a lie. So these two aspects have to go hand in hand in a strategic way, and people are doing fantastic work here. I think we're still short of reaching the goal of closing that gap, and I think this may well be the missing piece. And another thing is, I've been working very closely with this initiative with Palestinians on the ground everywhere throughout Palestine, from the Naqab in the south, through Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, all the way to the Galilee in the north. So we see Palestine as a single entity that needs to be liberated, not only parts of it. And we're putting forward a very clear message that the objective is, without any question, a single democracy with equal rights from the river to the sea, a free Palestine from the river to the sea with equal rights. Now, of course, the other side says, oh, you're promoting genocide of the Jews. And that, it makes sense when people don't have the context. When we consider what Americans know about Israel and about Palestine, that response is logical. It makes perfect sense. It's up to us to fill that gap and to bring people along to the point where that becomes a conversation. It's a legitimate conversation, and that is how eventually we're going to reach the halls of power, and that's how we're going to reach the decision makers. So that's this idea. We're hoping to start work early next month. We're still kind of cleaning the place up. put up a flag and get to work. And if anybody wants to join us, anybody wants to, come and talk to me, feel free to reach out to me. I'm available everywhere.
Yeah, and I want to encourage people, Miko, to get your book, The General's Son: A Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. That's your own transformation and
Yep.
your own transformation from an important, military family in Israel to becoming an anti-Zionist activist and in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Another book that you've written is called Injustice: The Story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. That's a terrible abrogation of Palestinian people's rights in the United States. People sent to prison for decades, unfairly, unjustly, illegally. They're not alone. The prisons, it's not just in Israel. In the United States, the subjugation and repression against Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim people is very, very pronounced. So people should get that book. They can also find you, Miko, at MikoPeled.com. That's MIKOPELED.com. Miko Peled, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Brian.